would you jump off a bridge if I asked you to?
No.
But we're friends.
Okay, sure, I'll do it.
See? Exactly. Easy. Easy peasy lemon squeezy, right? Peer pressure. You know, that's the old statement we were all told growing up. If they told you to jump off a bridge, would you do it? Which, by the way, I don't know who originated that statement, but that's going 0 to 100 too. You know, I cut class today. Oh yeah, would you risk your life if they asked you to? It just always struck me as a little interesting that we go from something minor sometimes to jumping off of a bridge. But that's the idea of peer pressure, is able to get you to do things you wouldn't normally do.
Right.
And I think the intent behind the phrase of jumping off a bridge is it's so outlandish and so ridiculous that no one would ever do that. But here we would do it for minor things, for small things. Wayne, I would venture to say you've been peer pressured before. I know I have.
Who told you that? That's another episode, sorry.
Agree with me. Stop gossiping. I would imagine you and I would both be able to tell some stories where we felt peer pressured.
Yes.
And felt like, yeah, I got to do this to fit in. What would you do if someone asks, is succumbing to peer pressure wrong?
Well, sure it is.
Next question.
Yeah, we'll move on. Peer pressure, I guess, to do the right thing would be good, right? That's just not normally how it works.
That's right.
Typically, it's going in the wrong direction there, and it's much harder to pull someone up than it is to pull someone down.
Right.
And so you start thinking about peer pressure. We could look at the example of Absalom, who wanted to make himself king, and what he did was actually start trying to get people on his side, and turn the kingdom basically away from David.
Right.
And just to read a little bit of what happens there, it's kind of interesting. 2 Samuel 15, verses 1 beginning. It happened that Absalom provided himself with chariots and horses, 50 men to run before him. So what did he do? He set it up. Look at me. Mm-hmm. Look at what I've got. My entourage, right? Now Absalom would rise early, stand beside the way to the gate. So it was whenever anyone had a lawsuit come to the king for a decision, Absalom would call him to say, "What city are you from?" And he would say, "Your servant is from such and such tribe of Israel." Absalom would say to him, "Look, your case is good and right. There's no deputy of the king to hear you." Moreover, Absalom would say, "Oh, that I were made judge in the land. Everyone who had any suit or cause would come to me. Then I would give him justice." And so it was, whenever anyone came near, bow down to him, that he would put out his hand, take him, kiss him. And in this manner, Absalom acted toward all Israel who came to the king for judgment. Absalom stole the hearts of the men of Israel. And you drop down to verse 13, I think. A messenger came to David saying, "The hearts of the men of Israel are with Absalom." And so what he has done, he's got people on his side, and they're talking about it. He's standing out there in the gate, and he's bringing people by. He's got this entourage, and what has he done? He's turned the whole kingdom almost to him, and away from David. David is God's anointed, and so we can, just to illustrate though what he's done. He has taken a situation where clearly, this is for himself, to suit himself, to make himself king, basically to lift himself up in that way. But what he has done is he has literally manipulated people in their thinking, right, to turn people toward him, and obviously away from David, and to do such. This is what people do today. Peer pressure. You've got a group of people who are doing a certain activity, whatever it is, and they're like, "Hey, if you're cool, you'd come with us. If you're cool, you get on this bus with us, you'd hang out with us, you do these things with us." The problem is that so many times those are not friends, and when you're the one that gets caught doing the wrong thing, those folks are gone and leave you high and dry.
Mm-hmm. And Absalom certainly wanted to leave people high and dry if they didn't
Yes.
benefit him.
Yes.
And they didn't value what he was trying to put down.
Yeah.
I look at Absalom and see a cautionary tale for preachers today, because sometimes we feel peer pressured by other preachers to be important, or by the brotherhood to be important. You know, you go to an event where there's tons of great preaching going on, and you see this is the keynote session, Monday night, 7 p.m. This is Monday night football time, you know, and who they have speaking in front of 2,000 people is not me. And you can think, I'm not good enough. And so you may try to do what Absalom does, where you go around and tell people, I'm a really great preacher. I'm a really great guy. If you just valued me and understood what I had to offer, I'd take care of you.
Yeah.
I'd give you types of sermons you need. This even happens in the local work setting. Two preachers that work together may have a situation where one of the preachers is considered the pulpit preacher, the other is considered an associate. Well, problematically, if that's a word, problematically, I'm going to make it one by the end of the episode. Problematically, they may look at some of the membership, and the associate may say, I want the pulpit's job. I want the pulpit, role. And so they may go to people and say things and even do things that promote a negative light and pressure. Certainly that involves slander, as we've talked about already. It also involves pressuring the congregation, because if enough people say something to the elders, maybe I'll get what I want.
Yeah.
And that's what Absalom is thinking here. Now, here's the funny thing about Absalom, too. He had just recently, in the time of reading at least, been welcomed back in to the kingdom. And the first thing Absalom decides to go and do is start trying to put more pressure on the people of Israel to say, we would rather have Absalom.
Yeah.
And it's almost as if, sometimes you'll see someone say, I've taken good care of you, haven't I? You really appreciate and value me, don't you? You know what I said I would do for you, right? You know I'm going to do that for you, don't you? And you see Absalom steal the hearts of the men of Israel. No wonder he did it. I know verse 7 says 40 in so many translations. Well, David's reign would not match up with that time period. And so it's not 40 years, it's 4. They got a transcribal error there somehow. And in fact, even in the margins of the Bible, the Septuagint, quoting and citing Josephus, which we've talked about before as a historical person who should be factored in and considered, that was not an inspired writer, said this would be 4 years. So for 4 years, every day, 4 years, not to get political, 2 episodes in a row or 3 episodes in this season or whatever, but every 4 years we've got a new election cycle.
Yeah.
And those cycles are filled with promises, but they're not usually filled without and throughout the 4 years. Usually whatever party loses, they go home, they lick their wounds, and they kind of heal up, and they get ready. And then when the election cycle starts back up, maybe 2 years out, a year and a half out, is when they start campaigning and they start doing things on a grander scale. They're hitting city after city. But right now, every single day, as we're coming up on November, here in just a few weeks for us, at the time we're having this conversation, every single day, these candidates are in a different city, trying to campaign for last-minute votes. This is what Absalom is doing. But he didn't just do it for a year and a half. He didn't just do it leading up to something and saying, we're getting close. He did this every day for 4 years. Talk about dedication.
Yeah.
They didn't have an alarm clock he could set back then. So I don't know how in the world they woke up early back then, what they would utilize to, help with that. But Absalom made it to where he would wake up early and get there before anybody else and be the first one that they see, where he'd say, man, your case is really good. And if you just had me on your side, you'd have what you need. It's also interesting that Absalom could have just gone to David and said, Dad, we need a judge who can do these matters. And if you're comfortable and willing, I would be happy to fulfill that role. I'd be happy to do that. If Absalom was doing things in a righteous way, he very likely would have been given the very thing that he wanted.
Right.
And yet Absalom decides, I'm going to take the kingdom by force. And that's what peer pressure is. It's forcing someone around you to do something that shouldn't be done. And this is almost always done in a way to try to increase popularity. Right. Certainly Absalom was increasing his popularity. The Bible saying he stole the hearts of the men of Israel. Later on in this chapter, you see the elders of Israel are on his side. Wonder how that happened. But for 4 years, every day he said, I've got your best interest at heart. David doesn't.
Right.
I've got your back. Well, no, Absalom was preparing to stab his father in the back. And this peer pressure that he put on the people made it to where he became king in Hebron and declared himself. I mean, he literally, he did the, what is that, UCF that years ago said, we're the national champions of college football, even though they hadn't won anything because they were undefeated. That's what Absalom did. He just kind of planted a flag in Hebron and said, I'm king now. Yeah. This is me.
It's good to be king.
And he had enough people behind him, though, because of the pressure he had put on them for 4 years, that there were people going around saying, yeah, Absalom reigns in Hebron. And when you and I look at trying to become more popular, someone might say, well, I've got to be popular. I don't think you understand what it's like to go to school or be at work and nobody likes you. And so isn't it okay to commit a little wrong to be able to be popular and keep the peace with everybody? What would you do if someone asks you to commit sin in order to be popular?
Well, this whole season is about overcoming temptation to sin. And just a reminder, James 1 says, each one is tempted when he is drawn away by his own lust or desires and enticed.
Right.
When desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin, and sin, when it's full grown, brings forth death. It's where it leads. And so is it okay to do a little sin if it leads to death? Well, that's really what we have to ask here. Clearly not.
Right.
But let's work up to that. So here's the thing: we've got to make up our minds. In other words, be committed long before we are actually tempted.
Right.
Long before we are presented with, hey, you want to be popular? Hey, you want to hang out with the cool kids? This is what we do. Mm-hmm. And if you're going to hang out with us, you gotta give into this. And so you've got to set your mind already.
Right.
It's a strong, the idea, and I forget the passage off the top of my mind, but when Jesus set his face toward Jerusalem, in other words, he knew what was happening. He knew he was going to be arrested. He knew he was going to be dying. He knew his time was near. All of those things. He set his face to Jerusalem. In other words, he was so committed and determined.
Right. Nothing
was going to stop his purpose. Death was his purpose.
That's right.
That's where he and so. But you've got to, we've got to. Somebody says, okay, well, that's really hard to do that. You haven't been in that situation. Well, I haven't been in a while, but it hasn't changed that much. Mm-hmm. It was still about being popular when I was in high school. I'm sure it was for you.
Yep.
And so those things have not changed. And though technology has changed, sin has not. Those same sins were around back then too. And so the desires. We had to tamp those down. Those lusts and desires, we had to be careful about those because Satan would know, hey, you want to be popular. Everybody likes to be liked,
right,
and wants to be known to some degree. There's the rare occasion you'll find somebody who's just completely inverted. They don't want to be out there. They don't want it. They just soon to just kind of skate in the background and nobody know anything about them. Most people, though, want to at least have some friends.
Right.
And so, it just so happens that it's so often the case that the most popular groups have the largest friend group, if you will, as well. And so that looks like the majority. Well, what did Jesus teach us about the majority? They're going to be lost.
Right.
Few there be that find that straight and narrow path and stay on it that leads to life. Matthew 7:13 and 14. And so I think we understand that and the difficulty that is in that. The problem with wanting to be popular wanting to be popular is the fact that it plays into that pride of life area. And so often it also then falls into the other categories as well. Lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes. And so it'll use all of those things to entice us to bring us to that point of sin.
And at what cost? I mean, really, if I'm the most popular person on the face of the planet, if Jesus doesn't know who I am, then what does it cost but my entire soul? Right. Which means that I have overpaid.
Yeah.
And when you think about the pricelessness that is placed on the soul, that Jesus died for it, which is not something I can go find at the dollar menu at McDonald's or the Great Value bin at Walmart, or in any way, shape, or form. I can't locate it at any type of sustainable located price. And yet I'll throw away my soul for popularity.
Right.
I'll throw away my soul just to be recognized better or be liked more. Man, that's not worth it. That does not make any sense. It should not be done, shouldn't be the case, and yet, unfortunately, too often it is exactly what people end up doing. And I think about Peter with Galatians 2, verse 11 through 21. Not the whole chapter section there is dealing with Peter specifically, but we're told that when Peter came to Antioch, Paul had to get in his face because he deserved to be blamed. For before certain men came from James, he would eat with the Gentiles. But when they came, he withdrew and separated himself. Watch this. Fearing those who were of the circumcision. Wonder why that would happen were it not for peer pressure. Wonder how that would take place were it not for the pressure placed upon him by these men who were of the circumcision. The rest of the Jews also played the hypocrite with him, so that even Barabbas was carried away. Barabbas, wrong guy. Even Barnabas was carried away with their hypocrisy. Watch how peer pressure permeates and just absolutely infects the whole. We start with just Peter, and we get to the rest of the Jews also playing the hypocrite with him, that even Barnabas. And Paul writes this as if to say, I was amazed that even Barnabas got involved in this. Right. And this hypocrisy. But when I saw that they were not straightforward about the truth of the gospel, I said to Peter before them all, if you, being a Jew, live in the manner of Gentiles and not as the Jews, why do you compel Gentiles to live as Jews? And he finishes off by talking about being the types of people that don't return to the old law. We stay in the law that Christ has given to us. Peter was trying to play both sides of the aisle here. Right. I'm going to be this with them and this with them. And Peter often wanted to be popular and wanted to be the one that was seen as a prominent figure, a prominent person. And much was given to Peter. He was the one given the keys to the kingdom by Jesus in Matthew 16, given the opportunity to loose and bind whatever needed to be loosed or bound in heaven. And yet that's not enough for Peter. Peter's still caught up in the peer pressure of this world. Jesus was tried to be peer pressured by Satan. Hey, I'll give you all these things. Give you all these things if you just fall down and worship me. You will have it. It will be yours. You take what you want, you can have all. And Jesus said, not worth it.
Right.
Not that he didn't want it, not that it wasn't a temptation. It had to be a temptation, but that Jesus would say, it is not worth it for me to do this. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to be the person who struggles in that fashion. And I think about Peter as one who needed to take a lesson from his Savior. And imagine being Peter, who had been with the Christ, and Paul has to come tell you off. That you are so pressured by the peers around you that Paul is having to come over there and knock some sense into your head.
Well, and I would think that Paul, and the way that it reads here, seems to indicate, because he said it before them all.
Mm-hmm.
And so I said to Peter, before all. In other words, all of who he just mentioned. The Jews that came from James, and Barnabas even.
Right.
And so it seems to not be just a rebuke against Peter, though Peter started it. Peter should have known better. Peter was the leader of the group, kind of. And so but before them all, they all needed to learn this lesson, which is why he rebuked Peter before them all. But I think this is probably, they all got a rebuke out of this. There was a lesson to learn here. Don't give in to this. And so I don't see it as just, oh, Peter, you messed up here, and I can't believe you led people off into this way. There was that part of it. But before them all means that they all heard this lesson. They're all sitting there going, we did give into this. Why did we give into this? So they were the ones who really succumbed to the peer pressure.
Right.
Peter did in the beginning, but then they followed suit. So they too followed along. And so they were all guilty of it.
That's right. Wayne, when we think about peer pressure and what we're going to do with it, someone may say, you guys have done a good job so far talking about some examples, but you just don't get it. You've not been there. You don't understand. You don't know what's going on. What would you do if someone asks, are there any biblical examples of those who actually did not succumb? We've already talked about some who did and some who didn't, but what about some who did not, as well as maybe a few others that we haven't covered yet who did?
Well, obviously, and I think you mentioned very briefly Jesus himself and his temptation. Thinking about, it could be seen as a form of peer pressure, obviously thinking about, you could have all the kingdoms, you could have all these people, as if he wouldn't already be able to have all these people, but that was what he was tempted with in Matthew 4. And he told Satan to get back. But you think about Joseph. Mm-hmm. Joseph is a great example. Joseph, in most situations, you might think, or in the majority of situations, somebody today going, well, if this beautiful woman was, hitting on me and I thought I could get away with it, I'd just give in. That's what most people would look at it and go, no, that's, Joseph said, I can't do this. I can't give in to what everybody else would say would be okay, or what even she wanted to do in that situation, even if no one else knew. And so obviously he was being pressured into that. And it must have gone on for a minute to think that, did this happen several times over the course of a certain length of time or something like that? Here's when you start thinking about what took place from Joseph finally saying, I cannot do this. Well, I'm going to tell. Well, that's peer pressure. There's a whole kingdom that's going to know about, what you did or didn't do, here. Well, okay, I'll give in.
Right.
No, I'm out. And he ran off.
Mm-hmm.
So when I think of, I think Joseph obviously is a great example of that. David obviously gave into peer pressure, into the pressure to sin, but then continued to hide it, to hide it along with Bathsheba. We often just blame David for this. Yes, he was the man. He was the one in charge. He was the king. Mm-hmm. And so clearly a lot of that obviously was on him. She also, though, gave into those things and didn't say seemingly a word.
Yeah.
At least that we're told in Scripture. So it's just hard to think about. These biblical examples are great examples of either giving in or not giving in. But when we are faced with it, if we ourselves are not committed to the Lord to begin with, it's easy to give up that position.
Yeah.
To say, no, we're going to hang in there. We're going to continue to be faithful. We're going to stay the course. But so often it's easier to just give up and say, all right, well, nobody really knows about it. Or everybody else seems to be doing it, and it's going to be okay.
Yeah. I think of Job.
Job's a good one, yeah.
One who did not,
yeah,
and then did at the same time, kind of after the pressure of everything finally had succumbed. I don't profess to know what Job was going through and feeling,
sure,
but I do know that Job's wife tried to tell him, you should curse God and die. I mean, it's enough, man. Knock it off. Just end your life. It's over. Yeah. His own friend said, come on, Job, you had to do something. Right. There had to be some reason this happened. Yeah. And even after they poked and prodded and did all of those things to Job, he stood fast for so long until, unfortunately, the pressure of everything began to be so much that he did succumb to, I think I would say, all of that peer pressure. All of that pressure finally he snapped and tried to debate God in one of the only recordings that I know of someone trying to debate God, and legitimately made the statement what God did to Job. You don't know anything, so stand up, gird your loins like a man, let's go. You ready? Let's do this. And Job at the end of it said, I'm going to cover my mouth so that I don't say anything else that's foolish ever again.
My bad.
I take it all back. And then I think about Rehoboam and the peer pressure that he faced when he asked the older counselors, what do you say I should do?
Yeah.
And the older counselors tell him, you shouldn't do this. You should be a good king, a just king. Consider it. But then I look at what happens when he goes to the people that he grew up with.
Right.
And the Bible says on more than one occasion in that he grew up with.
Yeah.
They grew up with him. These are his childhood friends that he grew up with, and they're all saying, I'll tell you what you should say. You tell them they ain't seen nothing yet. Yeah. Of course, that's the Michael Clark version. Hadn't been inventing yet. But you look at what they told him, and they said, you tell them you just think you know sorrow. Yeah. You just think my father's waist won't be near as thick as my pinky is. And you think about what Rehoboam ended up doing, and though it needed to be done according to what God had promised would happen, it was still foolish that Rehoboam did that and caused quite a lot of grief to come after that. Yeah. Wayne, you have anything else you want to close this out with?
Well, and I think of, when we look at what is this idea of peer pressure, especially we can all succumb to it, but obviously this, especially for our young people.
Sure.
This is where, as parents, we need to train them as best we can. As preachers, we need to encourage our young people to stay the course, show them what's right, and show them that it's okay to talk about these things when they are pressured with them. That's a big thing, I think, now, is because they feel like, okay, well, I have nobody I can really talk to about it. You wouldn't really understand. There's a reason that young people are coming back at us and saying, oh, you just wouldn't understand what I'm going through. Well, help me understand. Talk to me about it. And so we need to make it where our young people feel like they can come to us and talk those things through.
Absolutely. Thank you, Wayne, for being with me today. Thank you to our watchers and listeners, those of you that are a part of the Scattered Abroad Network following, those of you that are listening and subscribe to our podcast. We are appreciative of that. We hope that this has been a benefit to you and to give you some godly peer pressure. If you haven't subscribed to Scattered Abroad yet, you totally should. We hope that you will find things on there that would be beneficial to you as we try to seek to give you daily content based around the Word of God. We're so grateful to the Memphis School of Preaching for the use of their studios. If you're looking for a good school to support or send some students to, we would be happy to talk to you about that. You can either email us at admissions@msop.org or san@msop.org. Until next week, when we have another chance to sit down and give you a Bible answer to everyday questions, take care and God bless.